fall. Um, so my name is Key Beck. My pronouns are they, them, their. I always say if you want to know where Key is, they are running for city council. Um, and so a little bit about me is I am from Cincinnati, born and raised. I tend to avoid the where do you go to high school question, even though I went to Roger Bacon and LaSalle. And so for me, I've switched around a lot of schools. I've lived in around 8 of the neighborhoods in the 52 Cincinnati neighborhoods. And so a little bit of what I come to the table with is that I bring kind of a diverse and fresh look on the way that we can run this city. I grew up in poverty, so I understand what it feels like to be one of those African-American folks, Black folks who are making $15,000 a year, where other folks are not. They're making a lot more money. And so I know what it feels like to need support from not only the city, but from your community. And for that reason, I like to say that I work on my platform, which I call ACT, AACT. The first is accessibility, because I grew up with a grandmother who was a wheelchair user who lived with us. So things like going on walks was a normal thing. But when we saw that businesses were putting seating on sidewalks, I noticed that, there was no longer a way for me to walk down the street with my grandmother. One of us would literally have to walk in the street while she rolled on the sidewalk. And so things like accessibility are truly important to me. So ADA compliance, that sort of thing. I also believe in accountability. Believe it or not, I was the parliamentarian of my Graduate Student Governments Association. So I think that there is some benefit in structure. There's benefit in following rules of order. And there's benefit in, if we make mistakes, holding ourselves accountable. Because I think some people forget that legislation, motions, the things that city council does is not value neutral. As much as we want it to be, it's not. And so we need to be held accountable for the things that we do as city council members. Community is very important to me as well because I actually work in human services. I work at LGBTQ trainings. I am a training specialist and I work to make folks a little bit more accommodating and supportive of LGBTQ youth experiencing homelessness. And so community is super important. It's super important to kind of keep us together cohesively, but it's also super important that we let folks know what services exist. For example, I have family members and I have neighbors that are struggling with addiction right now of opiates. And if I didn't attend, and by the way, I'm on the board of the Over the Rhine Community Council, if I didn't attend a meeting where the heroin and needle exchange folks came, I never would have knew that service existed. And so one of those things I hope to do is let people know what services exist, because it's more about everyone needs to have the ability to live in this city. And some of us are surviving while others are thriving. And I want to get to a point where we're all thriving. And in order to do that, the last thing of my ACT platform is transparency. I think there needs to be transparency in the way that we do work, whether that be the budgeting process, right? So it needs to be a conversation. There needs to be multiple conversation. So I'm a proponent of participatory budgeting, but transparency also means that we need to know who's doing development deals. We need to know how do they decide who gets developments or not? How do we decide what neighborhoods get tax abatements? Because we know certain neighborhoods get all the tax abatements, or at least a lot of them, and others don't. And so that transparency is also a piece of what I do. And so I always say, it's time for us to act now. And so that's a little bit about me, other than I'm a vegan and a marathoner. So you may see me running around the neighborhood. I run through all 52, believe it or not. And so hopefully this will be a great opportunity for you to learn more about me. And thank you so much, Stacey, for providing this opportunity. And I cannot wait to hear from the rest of the prospective candidates. And so I will always pick who is right next to me. And so I'm going to go with Nick.
Hey guys, I'm Nick. I'm running for city council because I've been an activist for about 2 years now. I've been roaming the streets of Cincinnati, and I've just been helping anybody that I find that needs help. After college, I was in a really tough spot, and I got out of it just by learning to find who I was inside and becoming that person and not letting other people judge me for who I was and just accepting myself for who I am. I mean, it's all about acceptance, about love and peace, and that's my main message as an activist. It's about coexisting with one another and learning how to live with one another. I mean, ultimately, the world and this country is so divided right now. We need to figure out how to bridge that divide when it comes to the people. I mean, there's so much hate for each side when it comes to Democrats or Republicans. We need to figure out how to come together as one and make the changes that we want to see in our communities, so we can actually get better and start healing from the struggles that we've been dealing with, especially during the pandemic. It's been really hard for a lot of people just to survive. Like Quebec said, we have to figure out how to thrive. We have to figure out how to live. Like survival and living is two different things. There's a lot of people out here surviving, just trying to get to the next day. We have to figure out how to get people to that next year and past that and back into their goals and dreams. And so when I became an activist, I just started going out and staying out on the streets of Cincinnati. And I was actually staying downtown for I actually spent about 72 nights down there this last whole year, just with spending time with these people and figuring out what I could do as a person in my society to actually help them get back up from their struggles, whether it's homeless people, whether it's people who were just struggling in their own lives, whether it's people who were just trying to get back to whatever they were trying to do. It's just trying to figure out that balance and whatever they're trying to do in life. I actually lost my older brother about 8 months ago to suicide, and it really opened my eyes to a lot of people struggling out here. My brother was one of the happiest people you'd ever meet in your life, and it goes to show that there's a lot of people in our society and a lot of people in our city that are really struggling inside to bring that happiness back. I mean, he was one of the happiest people you'd ever meet, and he truly was sad inside. And so we have to figure out how to bring that happiness back out in people. And that's all I got to say for now. Thank you. And I'm going to turn this over to, we can go ahead and go to Evan.
Howdy, folks. My name is Evan Holt. Thanks a lot, Nick. I also want to thank Stacy, obviously, for setting this up. Really appreciate that. I'm glad to get the opportunity to actually meet you all because I've seen so much about your posts and whatnot. So this is a great opportunity. Yeah, my name is Evan Holt, Cincinnati born and raised, like Key and a few others. I was lucky enough to be accepted and graduate from the School of Creative Performing Arts. Yes, I do like to name drop that. Sorry. But I'm very grateful for the education that I got there. I studied jazz piano and classical piano, but I was secretly always really passionate about writing. So I really wanted to be a screenwriter. So I actually am a local filmmaker. I've been ranked a couple of times at City Beat as far as top local filmmakers, even though there are people doing much better work in that regard. So I'm grateful for the nomination and the vote of confidence. Most of my work in the city has been in customer service and food service, server, bartender, busser. So I've been at the forefront as our city is kind of transforming to a food and beverage destination. I've seen that, but as a result, the working class who really keep the city afloat with our sweat equity and our tax dollars don't really get considered in a lot of decisions that are made. So we're struggling. We're serving very privileged people. At the same time, we can't even keep our bills paid or roof over our head. And that kind of perspective, I think, is sorely lacking on city council. Historically speaking, city council has been ex-lawyers, ex-judges, ex-bureaucrats, business owners, nobody who really lives paycheck to paycheck or really knows what it's like to struggle to live here. And that's what I feel like I would like to offer and the respect to offer to city council, so that it's no longer ignored, it's no longer pay lip service, no longer told, oh, next time, next fiscal quarter or next budget go around, we'll allocate that. Like, no, we need affordable housing now, we need livable wages now, we need accessibility now. And we talk about livable wages. Unfortunately, like our city, we can't increase the minimum wage above the statewide minimum, but we're looking to research ways we can bypass that with ordinances and require employers to pay a decent wage, because 40% of the city makes less than $30,000 a year. And so even the ones who are looking to make that are likely spending at least 50% of their income on just rent alone. That's no way to make a living. That's no way to survive in the city. And I feel like a lot of working class people are really fed up seeing that our city's doling out tax breaks to wealthy developers to build condos that you and I will never be able to afford to live in. So I would like to create a mass working class movement so we have that kind of accountability. But people have been too busy kind of, trying to stay afloat. They don't really have time to kind of focus on what's going on at City Hall, and they shouldn't have to. We should be able to feel confident they're considering our needs and wants and focus on increasing our material living conditions. That's primarily my focus, especially with livable wage and accessibility, as Keith Beck touched on. But even the broader sense, accessibility pertains to a few other things that aren't just access for differently able, as that is a priority. It also pertains to public transportation. It also pertains to general infrastructure. It also pertains to the fact that large sums of the city do not have broadband internet access. As we've seen as a result of COVID, that's crucial, important for education, for people working and educating their students from home. So all those things combined pertain to our material living conditions, which should be centered above all. So that's my primary goal as a city council member and why I'm running. And thanks again, Stacy, for your time. So I guess I'll pass this on over to Phil O'Neill there, so that way Stacy can close it out since she is the host. If that sounds good.
Appreciate that, Evan. Evan and I go way back, actually. to elementary school because I first started at SCPA. But I ended up graduating from Walnut Hills High School, born and raised here. Went to University of Cincinnati, and I'm just a servant, just a natural born servant. My father was a pastor at Baptist Church. He passed away, and now my brother took over. I'm a deacon at the church. My mom is a retired CPS teacher. So just a lot of faith, a lot of prayer has been in my life since the beginning. I'm currently at work right now. I'm an athletic director at Western Hills High School. Been in education for about 9 years. I'm married. My wife and I going on 9 years. Have 2 kids. My beautiful son who's 6 years old. He's in kindergarten at North Avondale Montessori. And my little girl was born during COVID. I have a little COVID baby. She was born last May, which was an interesting situation. It was definitely crazy. Just to kind of be transparent, last summer, I did test positive for COVID, but I was asymptomatic. And I did not know until I was walking into the hospital to have our child. And man, they treated me like I had the Black Plague. It was wild. It was intense. But we got through it, and everything's all good now. Thank God. And so here I am. I'm running for city council. Like many others, I guess there's about 90 people now that put their name in the hat now. And but at the same time, you know, we all have to do certain things like this to kind of separate ourselves. So like I said, I've been around the city for quite some time. And like I said, even though I'm young, about 32, I am 32, but I've been in working in situations for almost 10 years now. Like I said, I've been in CPS 9 years. I'm also in the Army National Guard, which is, I know they're like, what do you do so much? But I'm 6 years in the Ohio Army National Guard. I'm a first lieutenant now. Up in a CAV unit up in Hamilton. I'm supposed to be at drill right now, but they postponed it because of the weather, because of the ice storm that's going on. So like I said, man, I serve in a lot of different areas, and I want to take the servant leadership and the attributes that I've gained over these years and bring them down to City Hall. I want to bring back honesty. I want to bring back integrity. I want to bring back trust back to City Hall. Been around for quite some time, running around with my father, running around with a lot of politicians downtown. But I want to bring up, like I said, bring something new, bring something, fresh ideas. I'm still working on my signatures. So, you know, hopefully we can knock that down like everybody else. But at the same time, with my signatures, I also carry around that Affordable Housing Act that they're trying to get on the ballot this spring, because affordable housing, I think, is key. And I think it's very connected to homelessness. I mean, you can't afford to live, so you got to be on the street. You know, it just ties in very well. So I used to be a member in Madisonville, and I was on the call on city government Washington today, and some people from Madisonville were on there today talking about the gentrification that's going on, the massive gentrification that's going on there right now, and the affordable housing that these big guys are not putting in there what they asked for. And that's what I want to do. I want to stand up for the little people, man. I want to stand up for the guys who have a voice in the community. I want to be that voice. I want to be that bridge that connects people. And then not just doing the right for the big guys, but right for everybody. And that's why I'm running. That's why I'm here. That's why, even though I got some stuff going on, I'm actively engaged in this right now. And hope to answer any questions. And that's pretty much it. So I'm passing off to Stacy, and Stacy, you can wrap this up.
Sounds good. Well, thank you all for sharing so far. My name is Stacy Smith. Not many people know my name, and that's okay. I tend to like to keep a quieter profile around the city, but I grew up in Cincinnati, born and raised, no plans to leave. My husband and I have roots here, and in the last few years, working as a therapist and a case manager, it has really opened up my eyes to a lot of needs of the city that are not being addressed. To back up a little bit further, I attended the late, great Cincinnati Christian University I started out as a music education major because I was very influenced by my high school choir director. I saw just how impactful they were to the students there, and just what a figure they were in the community, despite being so humble. And I wanted to be like that. And I love music. Evan, I did not remember that you were classically trained, so we got to talk music sometime.
I'm not nearly as good as I used to be, but that's a background in that. Yeah.
We gonna talk anyway. So I wanted to be like them and really make a difference in the lives of teenagers. However, in my freshman year of college, similarly to Nick's story, my cousin died by suicide very suddenly. And at that point, therapy and being a counselor kind of roared to the forefront of my plan. At that time, I wanted to avenge him, and the only way I knew to do that was to help people. So graduated with my bachelor's in psychology and ended up getting my master's in clinical mental health counseling. Now I am provisionally licensed by the state of Ohio to diagnose and treat mental health disorders, and I love it. I work for a private practice in Finneytown part-time, and full-time I work for one of the largest mental health agencies in the state in their school-based services, and I've been a partner with CPS for 4 years. And that has really been what has opened my eyes to the issues facing the city that I would like to address. So for example, I am expected to treat a child's PTSD when they live in a neighborhood that continually gets shot up, or I'm expected to treat a child's ADHD when they haven't eaten food outside of school in 4, 5, 6, 7 days, or I'm supposed to help treat a child's adjustment disorder when they're being evicted for the 3rd time and continuing to have these avoidable adjustments occur in their life. It just doesn't make sense. So much of my platform has to do with mental health. I have plans to increase our suicide prevention and crisis de-escalation training throughout the city. I have plans to establish additional mobile crisis units in the city that handle mental health concerns so that that no longer has to be taken on by CPD. And I plan to really focus on the partnerships between the mental health agencies in our city so that they can do better work, even better than what they're already doing, by building those partnerships. However, all of that is great, but that's only going to go so far if people's basic needs aren't being met. So I also have plans to address the food shortages, the affordable housing crisis, lack of transportation. And another reason why I'm running is I love to build bridges. I love to go into situations where trust has been broken and that the relationship has been broken, and to help mend it. And if there is a relationship that has been broken, it is that between the community and, unfortunately, City Hall. So I look at that situation and I'm just like, I want to go in and I want to help repair that. I want to show people that they can trust their city government again. So that is also a really big inspiration for my run. And for me, it's honestly not about getting elected. That's not the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is to see these plans come to fruition with or without city council. They'll probably be a lot easier with, city council. So, as much as I would love to be elected, I'm gonna still work hard no matter what the outcome. So best of luck and well wishes to my colleagues here. Let's go ahead and get started. By the way, those who are participating, some of you have already used the Q&A. That's what we're going to primarily be using tonight. We have a couple of pre-submitted questions that we'll answer first, then we'll get to the Q&A. So if you have questions for specific candidates, please go ahead and use that feature. If you have questions that you would like all of us to answer, go ahead and specify that. Our first, actually, I think I'm going to do it in reverse. I think I'll have the Q&A first so that those who are attending can kind of see their answers their questions answered. Does that sound okay with you panelists, or should I go the other way? Sound good? Okay, want to make sure we're all on the same page.
Absolutely.
This is a team effort. I coordinated it, but this is a team effort. I'm not trying to make all the decisions tonight. Okay, the first question came from James Allen, so thank you. James says, I'd like all the panelists to address their plans on city council budgeting in the coming years, and particularly the defund the police movement. Where do you anticipate that heading, and what ideas do you have? So I'll open that up to anyone who wants to respond. I would say go ahead and try to keep your responses 2 to 3 minutes, just so that everyone has a chance to answer, and we'll go from there. But anyone who wants to jump in first, go right ahead.
I was looking at James's question and appreciating. So I think one thing that's critically important about council for next year, both for council and the mayor, is this idea of relationships and coalition building, right? So I can have all of the greatest plans in the world, but if I don't have a good relationship with my other council members and with the mayor, it's not gonna mean much. And knowing that we're in a system in which the mayor sets the agenda. So I think first and foremost, there has to be a set vision for where do we want to see the city go in 10 years, right? And so I think that this whole campaign process is really a process in figuring out alignment and visions and alignment and beliefs for the city, so that when the mayor proposes a budget, that we're not, as a council member going, whoa, where are you going? Like, this is not meeting the immediate needs. But with that said, right, Stacey, I identify with you as a social worker that, this idea of people over paperwork and person-centered legislating is how I will engage the budgeting process. And we have to engage the budgeting process with like 2 sort of concepts in mind. So what are we triaging? Right? Like, what are these immediate needs, right? Shelter, boom, right? There's like for communities, there's this community safety and violence. There's human services, making sure that we're staying at that percentage that, we are guaranteed to fund. And then it's like, well, what are the strategic decisions that we need to make 5-10 years, right? Around, so triaging immediate use of tax abatements, but then how are we going to evolve the tax abatement program? So I think the budgeting process for priority is really about going in with a set of ideas, right? A set of ideas that we need to triage, affordable housing we need to triage, right? And then responding to what the mayor sets forward. So that's not as detailed because we don't know what that, who the next mayor will be, and we don't know what their budget priorities will be. But my value system, right, is one that is a, people over paperwork, a people-centered thinking. And as far as engaging the police, I think that Cincinnati sits in a unique, we are in a unique conversation with policing because of the collaborative agreement, right? And I think that a lot of our work from a council member's perspective is strengthening what is in the collaborative agreement and making sure that we are correctly funding the CAA, the Citizens Authority Complaint Board. We're adequately funding all of the mechanisms that are in the collaborative agreement. But I think it's also then ensuring that we are, Stacey, to your point, adequately funding and supporting and mandating the integrative use of interventions that are already there, right? We have mobile crisis units, but they're underfunded and they're not integrated into policing. We have social workers that work for the police department, but again, underfunded and not integrated. And so to me, from a Cincinnati perspective, we're in kind of a unique space where we have the framework for really incredible reforms. It just will take a council and a mayor to be committed to that framework and then to take it a step forward. And so I don't think that we have to actually reinvent the wheel. We just have to actually invest in and support the beginnings of real, true progressive reform.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing, Reggie. Key, Evan, Phil, Nick, who wants to take on James's question next?
I'll take on.
All right.
So when it comes to the police movement. I've been in talks with a lot of the police officers in downtown that work with the people that are struggling in the city of Cincinnati. I mean, ultimately, everybody's a citizen in our society, whether you're wearing a uniform or not. It's about collaboration, like Stacy and Reggie just said. It's all about collaboration and learning how to coexist. We got to figure out how to bridge that divide when it comes to the people and the police. I believe that the budget needs to be revised, and we definitely need to figure out how to rebudget to the fairness of what each department needs. I think everything needs to be budgeted out correctly, not just towards the police. We need to figure out what the police might need and figure out what the rest of the city needs and see what's more important. We can't be over budgeting different parts of the city because the public service right now is just so low. I think it's at like 3.4% or 5%, less than 5% when it comes to public services. We need to figure out how to get that number up because too many people are struggling right now. We just need reform. We need to figure out how to collaborate and figure out how to bridge that divide. Ultimately, we need to figure out how to work with these people, and also we need to figure out how to budget correctly. I mean, ultimately, if we're not budgeting correctly, the people aren't going to happy. And it's about the people's voice. If the people see that the police aren't doing their job correctly, we need to figure out how to help them do their job better. And so maybe it's new programs, maybe it's new training, and maybe it's working with our neighboring cities. I mean, there's a lot of different places around us that probably have better services and better relationships with their people. And so it's just figuring out how to have a better relationship with the people of Cincinnati. But I mean, ultimately, it's collaboration and figuring out what the people want. It's the service to the people, and that's what, like Stacey and Reggie said, it's public service. It's going out and figuring out the solutions to these problems and making it happen for the people of Cincinnati. Absolutely.
Thanks, Nick.
Absolutely.
Evan, Key, what are your thoughts? Key, I see you unmuted. Go ahead.
Well, I am muted, so I will talk. So, I have to be honest with you, right? I like to think, and I'm glad that we heard the analogy about reinventing the wheel. So let's go with that, right? If we had a organization or a company that they made cars, right? And these cars had tires, and every time, or maybe like 3/4 of the time that these cars are made, the tire goes flat. And every time we get a tire, it goes flat, it goes flat. We wouldn't look at that company and say, oh my gosh, the tires are going flat, but that's okay, you keep doing what you're doing, right? We would go back, we would reassess, and we would say, and if you're one of those GE people, you're like, use Six Sigma or something like that. But the idea is that we would reassess the situation and say, look, maybe we aren't doing this process right. Maybe we need to reappropriate funds in order to make sure that we're doing this process right. And what I can tell you as both an advocate, I worked at a violence prevention agency where we were basically sending out social workers with police on domestic violence calls, right? What we found was when we had a social worker who was trained to deal with that situation, the outcome was better, right? And so I am all for reassessing budgets and reappropriating funds when needed. I think like for too long, we've had this kind of thought process of, oh, well, it's broken, but we can fix it. But maybe we need to bring other ideas. Maybe we need to bring other kind of programming. And so I am fully for reassessing that budget. I'm fully for, places where we can put crisis intervention and social workers instead of police officers. I support that. Now, that doesn't mean that we're going to leave police high and dry, but it does mean that we need to make a hard look at the job that they're doing. And if we think about budgeting in general, I am a people person. It takes a village, right? So I believe that there should be a participatory budgeting process where we are going to communities and asking them, what are needs that you have? How can we write these into the budget? And that shouldn't be just a one-off conversation. I've went to those budget hearings, right? You go one big time, it's a big hoot, you have a good time, and then you feel like they haven't heard any of your concerns. Instead, I think that as candidates, we need to be going to community councils. We need to be going to neighborhoods, churches, community centers and saying, okay, this is the budget. Let's work together. What are your priorities? Because I am just a representative. So when we go to that budget hearing, I need to be coming with what the community wants to see in a budget. And so I believe in the participatory budget, and I am not afraid to look at things, reappropriate, and reassess. And so I understand that some folks have issue with the wording of defund the police, but you can put sugar on a powdered donut, but it's still sugar on a powdered donut. donut, right? And I think it is important that the same way we would reassess someone not doing, or the same way we would reassess a job that we feel may need some changes, we can do the same thing with the police. And then one last thing, I think, I think it's really important for us to acknowledge that, there is a long history of police officers and the police force being used for negative reasons, right? And so I'm not saying that every police is bad. I have police officers in my family. But I will say, as someone who's been profiled, as someone who's been pulled over on Liberty Street, had a semi-automatic rifles from 3 different officers pulled on me, I had to walk backwards, all because there was one letter difference in my license plate. I think that it's time that we reassess whether or not we need to reappropriate those funds that police are getting. And it doesn't mean that like all police are bad, like I said before, but it does mean that we have to be critical and we have to be honest with ourselves, and we have to hold folks accountable for the things that they do. And that means systems and systems as well.
Very good. Thank you, Key. Bill, I want to make sure you're not being left out because I know you're working. Are you able to answer this question either now or after Evan?
Yeah. Just I'll go after Evan if you don't mind.
Nope, not at all.
It's senior night here at the school, so I have to get a couple of pictures. I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's okay.
All
Evan,
right.
go ahead,
All right,
and then if you need me to, Phil, I'll go after Evan. We'll make sure that you get in when it works for you. So Evan, go ahead.
Sure. Yes, our budget obviously needs a huge overhaul. We can't continue to discuss crime in the abstract without acknowledging the correlation and causality between crime and poverty. So you look at the uptick in shootings we had last year, and everyone's like, oh, what are we gonna do about these shootings, without factoring in how many people lost their jobs this year, how many people died this year, how many people got evicted from their homes this year. So we can no longer do that. We also have to factor in why crime happens, and it's typically a result of people's material living conditions not being met. So you look at the police as an institution. We're experiencing a homelessness crisis, a mental health crisis, and a health crisis. And as it stands, police can't really help with that. They can't really contribute to help with that. If a person is experiencing homelessness, all they can do is move them someplace else. Or as far as like mental health issues, like they're not properly trained to deal with people who are having mental health crises and are dealing with that in real time. They're not prepared for that. So you look at our city's budget, we're dealing with all these crises, and we have COVID happening. And instead of investing more in social services and things that keep people safe, we increased the police budget. We gave them all raises. So that seems like an inconsistency in priorities here. Here will be a prime opportunity for us to show up and do what needs to get done in terms of taking care of the most vulnerable and allocating resources appropriately. And we decided to continue to pad the police budget. So it seems like to be a disconnect in priorities. So yes, I do support the defund the police movement as it pertains to adjusting our budget. It doesn't mean eradicating the police completely. It means getting to the root of where our money is being spent. So I also saw recently that we're seeing, I guess they're short about 70 CPD officers this year. I think it'd be a great opportunity to take that money we would have spent on those officers and spend that more efficiently on mental health crisis issues, things like that. So make sure that, again, things that actually exist in the interest of public safety. So that's where I stand on that. And I think you look at our city's budget, I guess it's 1.3 to 1.5% of our city's budget is allocated for social services. That's absurd. Of a city of our size, we need to be upticking that. They shouldn't have to fight for that. That should be a guaranteed standard that we're increasing as it necessitates to make sure we're taking care of the most vulnerable. That needs to be the priority above all. Like, I'm not against big business, I'm not against development, but I'm against it happening at the expense of the most vulnerable. I can't feel good about Cincinnati becoming a great destination city where we have rampant abject poverty, which we all had well before COVID hit. So that would be my priority as far as budgeting goes. Obviously, there's a lot to learn, and I'm eager to learn about that. But what can't be taught is our priorities as far as where our morals are, and it pertains to where our budget goes.
Yep, thank you, Evan. I think Phil is doing his pictures. Senior night's really exciting, so I'll go ahead and answer. I'll be completely honest as well that my plan does not involve completely defunding or eradicating the police. In a perfect world, would it be great if we could do that? Absolutely, but we don't live in a perfect world. That being said, however, I do have plans to take funds that are currently being used by the police and reallocating them elsewhere. On my platform, I'm calling it community-focused police reform. Part of that will have to do with also just healing the community of trauma that has been imparted at the hands of police. So really focusing on healing that divide, not for the sake of, mending the relationship, because the relationship, especially between Black and brown people and police, was broken back when slaves were brought to the United States. And the sole purpose of law enforcement back then was to catch and bring slaves back. That relationship's never going to be completely healed. However, I do have plans to help individuals who have experienced or witnessed police brutality to work through some things so that no longer has to traumatize them. As far as the actual reallocating of funds, however, so take the city of Denver, for example. They recently, like within the last 6 months, really bolstered what's called their STAR program, which is essentially their mobile crisis unit. It's their team of social workers and therapists who became dispatched from 911. So someone called 911 and said they're having a mental health crisis. That team would be dispatched instead of the police. And on, I think it was like 740 some calls within 6 months, on none of those calls was there an arrest made, was anyone shot. So, to expand our mobile crisis units means that when someone is overdosing on heroin, we are still in the throes of a opioid epidemic. A police officer doesn't get dispatched. We have a social worker, a therapist, maybe a nurse armed with Narcan who can go to that individual, help save their life, and then help get them the further help that they need. So if we have police officers, or fewer police officers going on calls like that, that's less that we have to pay the police to do. I also have plans to really bolster a traffic control unit in Cincinnati. So, like, for example, when we have large events that need, traffic directed and patrolled and things like that, or we have construction sites, oftentimes you'll see some police officers there. I don't think that's necessary or part of their job. That has nothing to do with enforcing the law. So we could have cases like that be reallocated to a traffic control unit of some kind, which not only creates jobs, but again, if we're no longer paying police officers to sit at a construction site all day, then we can use that funding to then fund the traffic control. Same with animal control. One of police officers' biggest complaints is they're constantly getting called about people's lost pets, or there's an animal on the loose, things like that. If we create more jobs and we have an animal control unit in the city that is funded, fully staffed, then we no longer have to pay the police to do that, and so on and so forth. So my plan is to create new systems that we're currently paying and expecting our police officers to do, and no longer have them handle that. That way we don't have to pay them for it anymore. So if we find that, hey, we have, we spent this much on traffic control this year just by piloting the program. Next year, we anticipate doing this much. We will probably take some of that from the police fund because they will no longer be expected to do it. So it's a strategic way to reallocate the funds. Again, I understand the defund the police movement, and I wish it was possible. I don't think that's realistic. However, I think that there are practical ways and plans to get some of that funding out of CPD and into the community, and also creating jobs while doing so. Phil, are you in a place where you can respond?
Yes. I made sure that I came and said something about this. I deal with budgets now just by being the athletic director. So my budget, I reassessed, especially from this past year because of COVID. So I think every budget, especially if I get in office, it needs to be looked at, see where we can cut some things, add some things. So budget is huge if you doing any type of business. But at the same time, particularly with the police, it can definitely be reformed. We can definitely cut some things if we can. I think the past couple of speakers, Stacey and Evan, can definitely hit it on the horn with civil services. So instead of the police running out and be mental health people coming out, just particularly from what I've noticed here at the school, I know when that George Floyd thing kind of happened, they were talking about taking the police out of the schools. And I wrote an email to my principal saying, please don't do that. Just because the police at the school, the kids know those guys. The people, they have a relationship with the police here. And that's what it comes down to, is about relationships and building strong relationships. I know when I was a kid, I saw the police because they showed up to the schools with the DARE program. Hey, the police officers coming in with the DARE program. So it was try to build positive relationships instead of the police just showing up when there's something wrong going on. Because then the kids are like, oh man, because those kids turn into adults, and then those adults have those issues with the same police. So it's just surrounding positive relationships with the police and then building those positive relationships. So I think that's very key. And at the same time, adding more civil services as well. Because there's a lot of mental health issues, a lot of different issues in the city that the police don't have to be called and they don't need to be responsible for. So that's my piece there with that.
Stacey, could I just add one quick thing I've been thinking, and just in terms of hearing, because I see there, Allie in the chat is really sort of pressing on the specifics of this. And so I think that, when we look at this in the context of, right, like there is a spirit of, and absolutely, in conversations I've had with police officers, that there are ways to maximize efficiency, right? Police officers definitely are like, nope, there are a whole bunch of calls that we are not needed. So we are aligned there, right? But we also have to recognize that there is a system that is in between what police officers feel on the ground, what citizens and maybe electeds feel, and that is the relationship between police unions, and then thinking about the contract period, and also thinking about the timing of the budget, right? And so, whereas my spirit and who I am is definitely aligned in this space of this sort of radical reimagining of the work, I also do want to acknowledge the steps that we are taking, right? And that this is, in many cities, elected officials feel completely held hostage by the strength of police unions. But I highlight, we are in a different space in Cincinnati, because I just think about even this new round of negotiations, the way that we have shifted arbitration, the way that we have shifted, the minimum in terms of records and looking back on police. And so that I just want to say, I want to capitalize on this idea that in this city, though it is not boom, hard hitting change, that we're working within a system that we can push and that we can shift. And I say that not to be the grandpa's oh, let's just be pragmatic, but so that we can be in it for the long haul. And that we can also then, Evan, I really appreciated you thinking about taking this macro lens and understanding and so while we're doing these downstream interventions, we are thinking about and making direct connections between tax abatements and housing development and wages and crime, right? And so that there's a space where we can do this work. And I love the alignment of our visions, on this call in terms of pushing forward, but then always still be contextualizing, the expenditure on X police budget is directly related to the lack of investment in this more macro, larger systemic issue.
Yeah, that makes sense, and I appreciate your perspective on that. And no, you don't sound like a grandpa at all, so don't worry about that. I want to kind of move forward to another question. This one was pre-submitted, and maybe for the sake of time, maybe 1 to 2 minute answers. Now, that being said, I am happy to stay on here past 8:30 to keep talking about these things. So anyone who can is welcome to stay. So the question that was posed is, what will you do to help the homeless find permanent housing and pathways to education and employment? I'll go ahead and start this one just very briefly. There are programs and agencies out there that help with this. They are either not very well known or underutilized, underfunded, understaffed. So a couple that come to mind is Bethany House. They often work to offset families' costs as long as the family is working, help them keep in their affordable housing. Project Connect works really, really well with students within our schools. So really emphasizing staffing and funding, getting funding for those programs, and really putting an emphasis on, our current homeless shelters, for example. Do they have people there who can help with, hey, people are here today, let's sit down with them and get them a haircut. Let's get them a fresh change of clothes. Or on another day, you might have someone who comes in and does a training on job interviewing skills. You might have someone who comes in and focuses on, okay, who all here does not have their GED? What can we do to put you on a pathway to get that accomplished? Who here has an addiction? How can we get you set up? So I think our homeless shelters and the agencies that currently help with the emergency housing, I would love to see those open up more, to have more people come in and address some of the needs that contribute to homelessness. So that's part of my plan, and I hope that answers the question specifically enough. All right, my time is up. Whoever would like to answer may. Also, you do not have to answer every question. I fully say I'm not an expert in everything. So there might be some questions where I'm like, I don't know. I don't have an answer to this. So that's okay too.
I'll go if you guys don't mind. So when it comes to housing and the people on the street, I've worked very hard with these people the last year and a half, figuring out their needs and what they need on a daily basis by sitting with them and talking to them and sleeping down on the streets and actually spending time with these people and learning their concerns, learning their stories. And I think we need new housing to provide these needs for these people, whether it's we're renovating new spaces and putting people up in them and surrounding them with people that actually care about them and want to see them get out of these drug problems and out of these mental illness problems and getting out of these mental disabilities that they have. I mean, it's learning how to kind of figure out those problems and help them get back on that track. Like Stacey, you hit it on the head. It's figuring out where we can work with these shelters and start giving these people the needs that they need to start getting their lives turned around. Ultimately, there's a lot of people out there that want to help, but they just don't have the hand in the Cincinnati to actually make it happen. And so it's giving them that extra hand and figuring out their needs and actually figuring out a solution to get these people on the street. We have a huge homeless population in Cincinnati, and it breaks my heart. I mean, I work with over 300 homeless people downtown, and seeing these people struggle and literally live like animals is horrible. We got to figure out how to repair this in our city. I mean, especially during COVID, just where I live in Mount Washington, more and more homeless people end up on the street every day. I mean, people are being evicted left and right up here. And we need to figure out how to help these people. A lot of these people before COVID were living normal lives, and now they're living on the streets. They're being pushed out. They're living with their families on the street, and it's really cold out there right now. I mean, I heard about somebody died recently because it was so cold outside. We got to figure out new solutions to help these people get off the streets and get their problems taken care of, and just surrounding them with people that care about them so they can get their problems taken care of. But one of my big goals this year, if I get elected, and just like Stacey said, this mission isn't about getting elected initially. I mean, I'd love to be elected, but it's about figuring out how to work with the government and these shelters to make better programs and things and bring up new resources to help these people. Ultimately, I think when it comes to the public services that we have currently, it's just way underfunded by the city government, and we need to figure out how to work with these shelters and start helping them as well, and helping them get their word out about the places that they are providing, but also providing new places by the city to help these people get their lives back on track. I'll turn it on to the next person.
All right, who's next?
So I'll go by saying I think we need to readjust the way we look at this issue, because one of the leading or highest groups of folks experiencing homelessness are actually youth, right? It's youth who are couch surfing, it's youth who are living in hotels, it's youth who are experiencing this, maybe even staying at school for days on end just to get food. And so I think like we need to change this idea that working with folks experiencing homelessness is working with folks out on the street. I also think we need to change this kind of perspective, because what we know about youth experiencing homelessness, because this is what my specialty is, almost half of the youth experiencing homelessness are LGBTQ. So they've been kicked out of their homes, they've been forced out, they were being abused, whatever that may be, right? And so I think like if we're talking about folks experiencing homelessness, we need to also be talking about affordable housing. And this is why I love Evan's kind of macro look, right? Because if there's not affordable housing, it doesn't matter if you get a job, because that job won't be able to pay for that housing. And if you don't have a livable wage, it doesn't matter if you have housing, because you won't be able to afford to keep that housing. And so that is literally what we have actually found happening during COVID, is that folks who had these low paying jobs weren't able to keep and continue affording their home. And so I think we need to look at a macro level for one. But I also think it's important that, you know, we also think about homelessness as an issue that we all can touch on and that we all can help. And so there are things called like TIF funding that instead of spending it on developments of a certain sort, we could spend it on shelters. We can also spend that money on employment programs for folks who are recently incarcerated. And so I think it's like, again, I'm going on my it takes the village, but I think it's a it takes the village mentality that we need to think about, because it's not directly like getting someone off the street and putting them in a house. It's more about what are the systems at play that lead to this big group of people experiencing homelessness, and how can we rectify that system in order to make sure that folks have a livable wage, affordable housing, and a house over their head, or whatever they want their house to look like, their home.
I wanted to piggyback off of something that Key said really quick, because I genuinely don't know the answer to this question. So if anyone watching or on Twitter can educate me, or any of you guys, folks, please do. With the tax abatements, I know that this often goes to, you know, higher end neighborhoods, developers. A question that I've been wrestling with is it possible to offer tax abatements to landlords and developments of affordable housing units? So like, for example, if you build an affordable housing unit that has, well, that's fully affordable housing, can the city offset some of the cost of the individuals living there by offering the landowner or the property owner a tax abatement, so that that is not then covered by the individuals living there, so that they can focus on, you know, getting a car, or even just getting their refrigerator stocked, for crying out loud. So I don't know. I'm not a tax abatement expert. So if anyone wants to educate me on that at some point, please do. If it is possible, that is a direction that I will head first.
Yeah, Stacey, I wanted to say, really spot on with that. And Key and I overlap in that. I worked briefly in this space, and he's really they have really been pioneering in this work. And so I would say there are a couple things that we can do right now. As council members, we can ensure that we are moving to that 1.5% of the general fund for human services, because we have incredible institutions in the city doing the work, competent people doing the work, and if we're thinking about, okay, when we get on council and get elected, what are the things that we can do in that 2-year period? Like, we can ensure and prioritize that funding is there, so that the programs that support LGBTQ youth and the training and the work that Key is doing, that support folks who are reentering society, that support all of the scholar houses that are popping up in the region. So, housing for single mothers that are then enrolled, making sure that those programs are rocking solid in support. And then we have to recognize, like, we have this continuum of care. Even though even though the number of people experiencing homelessness in our county is too great, it should not be, we still have one of the best continuum of cares in the country in terms of how we deal with people experiencing homelessness and getting into housing. And so I think that there's a prioritizing funding the continuum of care to make sure that we have enough beds open so that we can begin to triage those immediate needs of folks, like, not sleeping on the streets, being in a warm place. Also making sure that those shelters are LGBTQIA and also culturally responsive when it comes to race and when it comes to all sort of demographics, right? And then we have to think about this idea of like, so then how do we create more housing? So Key will tell you, one of the hardest things is that when you're working in a housing program and trying to get folks who are experiencing homeless housing, lots of landlords feel very cagey about that work. So as a city and as a council, we can help shift that cultural environment, right? And I think when we can use things like tax abatements, we can incentivize folks that own multifamily units to say, hey, if you commit to X number of years of X percentage of your units being available to the continuum or, X number of vouchers, we can use tax abatements in that way. In fact, I think that's an equitable way of thinking about using tax abatements. And then we have to think about these macro issues around like, so what are some of the barriers to job training programs? Well, job training programs are very archaic and lots of people don't get in because they smoke weed, right? And it's just like, I just see it all the time. We see just lots of folks who are just competent, ready, available, and it's like, oh, you tested positive for marijuana, so we need to legalize marijuana, right? Like, so there's these like we've been saying, they're like, it's not just one issue, but it's like all of these issues that intertwine. And I think that these things that I laid out are like things that we can actually do in the 2 years to get them almost going to begin to shift that conversation.
I love what Reggie said. It really is important. Like, these people out here on the streets, they're fighting multiple wars. They're not just fighting one battle. They're fighting drug problems. They're fighting mental illness. They're fighting their disabilities. And a lot of these people fall into mental illness from living on the streets. And so they're fighting multiple battles, and it's figuring out how to get them out of those battles. I mean, ultimately, if you're fighting more than one battle, it's really hard to get out of a situation. So you got to figure out how to get them out of those situations by providing them with something that they can incentivize to get out of that situation, but like getting them a job, getting them housing, and figuring out how to get their lives moving forward so they can get back to their goals and dreams.
Exactly right. Evan,
I
what are
want to
your
back
thoughts?
something that Key was saying there about the way we view people experiencing homelessness. Is they're not just people who are chronically on the streets. A lot of them are working poor people who have a job, who've been priced out of the city. Like, I look up the numbers. In the last 5 years, the cost of a studio 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom apartment have gone up 100%. 100%, and wages have not budged. So what do you think is going to happen? People are going to be evicted from their homes and not be able to stay afloat. So again, I like the idea we're all acknowledging that all these issues are intersecting. They all compound into each other. So we have to understand that relationship. We also the issue, obviously the question is how we deal with it. Homeless people experiencing homelessness, obviously we need to invest more. We need physical structures. Obviously we need to get to the root institutional reasons that produce these outcomes. But at the end of the day, people need physical structures right now. My partner, Jenna, actually just started a new job working at Welcome House. She's going to be the director there. And I'm hoping to get a look at their ins and outs because they're kind of doing the whole kind of program. But seeing their statistics, because a lot of overlap in being Northern Kentucky, because a lot of those people over there are from Cincinnati. So the very symbiotic relationship there. But she was emphasizing that above all, like before we can address their mental health issues or whatever there is barriers to getting employment or housing, we have to get them in physical houses. Like that has to be number one priority. So I know our city's doing great work. My mother is a social worker, about 26 years. She worked for Hamilton County twice. I know there's great work being done, but can you imagine what could be done if they were working with twice the budget? I just can't help but wonder, I think it's absurd they have to fight for that 1.5. Well, meanwhile, the cops are guaranteed for some reason because they have a strong union to fight for them to guarantee their yearly income increase. Like we need that kind of strength as far as like the union representation and social workers and just investing there. I mean, it's not really a radical how we're going to solve this issue. Like it's effectively way cheaper to keep people in their homes and off the street than what the money we spend with policing and other issues that pertain to that as well. So that can't be neglected at all. And also one last thing, as it pertains to affordable housing and building more homeless shelters, we have a case of NIMBY in this city. Whereas there are plenty of neighborhoods where we could be putting affordable housing or shelter for people experiencing homelessness, and the local community councils or the business owners there don't want it. They think it's going to reduce their property value. So we have to dispel with that myth and get them on board. Like, everyone wants to have us to do something about the homeless situation. They don't want to help, or they don't want to present any solutions. Or so it's like, yeah, we need more shelters, but not here. Like, no, none of that. Like, we need to kind of reevaluate our relationship, the way we view people experiencing homelessness, and definitely robust investment.
Completely agree. So one of Allie's other questions, to shift gears, was, and again, we'll try to keep answers kind of short so we can get to some more questions. She says, will you vote against all developments, private and public, which only benefit the rich, whether it's for public funds, zoning changes, right-of-ways, etc.? So have at it, panelists.
Yes. Like, yes. I mean, like, obviously we need to have the research and know what we're doing going forward. But my point of view on any decision made on council, as it pertains to where our money is allocated, is how does it benefit the working class? How does it benefit the most vulnerable? We have plenty of condos, and plenty of people can't afford to live in them. So less of that, less things that seem to only benefit a small minority of people, and more things that benefit the majority. Like, I'm not against outdoor seating, but notice how it's only focused in OTR and not the other 51 neighborhoods in the city who could also benefit from that. Like, those kind of considerations, I feel like, are often neglected, and I would like to be the person voicing them.
I agree. My answer would be yes too. I share kind of like my hierarchy of needs, which is what my platform is based on, and profit is not on that hierarchy. Therefore, if someone comes to me and I'm on council and they want me to vote for this thing that's going to make them a profit, I'm not the council member that you want to talk to in that regard. My vote would be no. So my answer is yes. Hopefully that wasn't too confusing just now.
Same as Stacy and Evan said, my answer would be yes too, for voting no on something like that, because it's an immoral act when it comes to the people's values, especially the people that are struggling in our society. We can't just be benefiting the rich. It needs to be an equal balance and a fair balance between the people that are both trying to benefit. I mean, and I don't think that there should be any profit over people. Profit over people is wrong. It's people first, and then profit for the people, not corporations, not for the businesses, not for ourselves. It's public service and helping the people get back to what they want to do. So my answer is yes as well.
So I will be honest and say I live in the contested Over the Rhine. I often like to say Over the Rhine is a neighborhood. OTR is a trademark, right? Because there is some history to this neighborhood that is being erased by things like gentrification, things like developers only caring about the best ROI, return of investment, which is up to this point what has been funded with abatements. And so what I would like to say is I think that it's not enough to just say rich, because I think for some people, they don't really understand what that is, because that is very subjective. And so I think what I should say is I will always support development for 0 to 30 AMI based on the city's AMI, because we have this thing right now where we have this 60% to 80% being called affordable housing, and that is not affordable housing for the majority of folks, specifically the majority of Black folks, specifically the majority of Black folks that lived in Over the Rhine for the last 20, 30 years. This is a historically Black neighborhood. People make on average $15,000 to $16,000 a year, yet they are making housing in condos that are $2,000 a month. And a livable wage should provide 30% of your income on housing. Anything above that is not livable. And so for me, I will not support anything that is pretty much over that 60 to 60%, because for me, anything over 60% becomes unaffordable to the average person living in Over the Rhine or in any neighborhood, specifically the Black community. And since we make up half of this city, it's about time that we put the focus on that 0 to 30. Now, that doesn't mean that some things that I personally am against, I'm gonna not support, but I will say that if this development, whether it be closing a street, closing an alley, putting up a development, if this happens at the expense of folks who are in that 0 to 30, I will not support that. And that track record has been found through my Over the Rhine Community Council meetings. You can look up all the meetings. I was against Elbin Liberty. I was against every development that was pretty much market rate, because what I noticed is that my neighbors are literally disappearing. There are some folks who have been in this neighborhood 30 years and they are no longer here. They've been displaced. They've been moved outside of the city. And so I think it's really important that we take a very firm stance that if we are going to support neighborhoods and we are going to support people, that means we have to make some really hard decisions. And some of those high-powered developers, we're just going to have to say no. And we should incentivize developers who will build 0 to 30 AMI affordable housing. Those are the folks who we need to be highlighting with the tax abatements, in my opinion.
So I would jump in and I would say, so I think it's a broader question. So my short answer is no. And here's why I would say no. We can't have this conversation without talking about wages, and we can't have this conversation without understanding and contextualize Cincinnati's depressed housing market for decades, and that there is actually two different worlds in which people live, right? So I moved here from Boston. So Cincinnati, based on my Boston experience, is an affordable city. And Cincinnati is a city in which people will move from more expensive cities, and they will find Cincinnati very affordable. But for people who have been born and raised here, what they see is that their money is not going as far as it used to because of rising rates. So there's this reality is that like there was this affordability and charm to Cincinnati for decades because of a depressed housing market. But when compared to peer cities like Indianapolis, North Carolina, like Cincinnati was not growing. So we have to talk about wages. Wages have to increase, and wages have to increase significantly so that folks who are working here, working in service industries, right, working entry-level jobs, can begin to rise with the level of inflation that is happening, that it is going to happen, right, and that we have to be prepared for. So the reason why I say no is that Cincinnati, we don't have a housing strategy. So when you look at cities like Indianapolis, like Detroit, like Cleveland, they have mapped out 10, 20 years, the pathway to luxury condos, to affordable housing, to community economic development, to developments in communities so that you can bring mixed income and affordable housing developments to communities. Right? So part of, when you think about, I'm a little bit over the place, but it's going to make sense. When you do affordable development, there has to be a component in the community as well that is that market rate piece, because that's how you get those amenities in there. So right now, we're working to bring a grocery store to Avondale, right? The biggest challenge that we had, right, our market study, supports that the grocery store, could count on a revenue of about $75,000 a week, right? Big retail box groceries are like, nope, won't do it, right? We need to be, they need greater money. And so I think that in Cincinnati, we have just been so reactive to the unfairness. We've been so reactive to the fact that the only development proposed are condos. But the reality is that the city can sustain development at both ends, but we have not seen the affordable development. And part of that is that we don't incentivize the people who do affordable housing development. That's its own beast. That is its own skill set. So as a city, we need to, as Key, you're exactly right, be incentivizing through what we have with our tax abatements, the people that can actually do the work, right? And then we have to think about what are our zoning laws. So we have these zoning laws that depress our housing stock. So when a single family house goes up for sale and loses its ownership, or like let's say a duplex or whatever goes up for ownership, in most neighborhoods, it's rezoned to be a single family house. And so we lose those units. So I think we need a plan. And yes, like as a triage for a year, and we say, okay, we're not going to approve, luxury condos. Yes, sure. right? But I think that that is just literally the Band-Aid to stop the hemorrhaging. And then we have to have a full strategy to address our whole economy.
I think we're all in agreement that that is a band-aid, but that's kind of like almost like the bare minimum, considering like our priorities and our necessity for affordable housing. I'm wondering if you two might be more knowledgeable about, could we skip the middleman of offering incentives to developers and just have more public housing? I mean, our nation is like actively defunded public housing for years, and we see the results of that. Also, HUD money can also be spent for not just public housing units. Apparently, it can also be used to incentivize building new houses, so we can actually create some generational wealth. I'm curious if that's a thing, you know, because I'm trying to navigate that as well, of having more bolder solutions of, relative to the things that we tried and haven't really worked historically.
I know that there are some agencies in the city that have recently actually bought vacant houses and have, you know, transformed them into affordable housing, or most of the time it's transitional housing units. So it is possible, and I think that there are agencies within the city that would like to do that. So I think an important thing for me would be to identify those who maybe need some help doing that, but have a plan to successfully purchase, rehabilitate, and then operate that housing, and then helping them do that. So it can be done. There are agencies that are doing that.
So I just wanted to add one development that I'm watching right now, and I apologize that I'm so over the Rhine focused, but it's just what's on the soup du jour, if you will.
And you're representing your neighborhood. You don't have to apologize for that.
Yeah, right. And so one of those developments that I'm watching is the senior center down here, where it's a partnership between Urban Sites, which is a housing developer, CMHA, and the senior center. And so what they are going to do is they're going to buy some property, and then they're going to provide affordable housing to seniors, which, by the way, seniors are the backbone of every community. So we need to be taking care of our elders. I just want to throw that in. Shout out to the matriarchs, especially. But that's a perfect example where public and private can come together to provide affordable housing. The city can give them incentives to do that, right? And so again, the issue is that many of the developers that are getting abatements nowadays, they want the quickest return on investment possible. And in order to do that, they have to have higher housing prices. And that is really what is starting this high raise of rents and market rate rents. And I think that, again, we need to be incentivizing community organizations, both public and private, who are willing to build affordable housing. Because in my personal opinion, that is some of the backbone of many of the neighborhoods. Those are the people who are going to stay there generationally. And Evan kind of pointed something out, and I don't know if you picked it, but owning your home is one way that generational wealth can be passed on. And if we looked at the unfair housing practices of the past, that is why many African Americans don't have that generational wealth, because they were denied housing. The GI Bill denied them housing. It was given to white soldiers, even though it was intended, right? And so many of these programs that have been created historically have not benefited Black folks. And since this is a BIPOC panel, we need to speak about the elephant in the room, right? We need to look at these policies and make sure that they're doing what they're exactly doing. Right now, we have Fact 50 that basically says that if you develop affordable housing and market rate housing together, that you can get incentives. So there are ways around this. There are legislations, there are policies that we can utilize, but we have to have this focus of how can we take care of everybody in the community, and not just how can we bring money in from the highest bidder. And that's what I kind of hope to change when I get on city council.
In the very least, can we have a commitment to not allowing these developers to throw up these slapdash carbon cookie cutter buildings that are all drab and bland and like don't have balconies and they look like prisons, but they have, you know, nice, you know, storefronts? Can we just reduce on that? Like, no more of you just kind of using the cheapest materials to throw things up and then charge $2,000 for it. Like, let's build some structures that are gonna last, that look good, that complement the neighborhood, you know, that don't look like they're in stark contrast to everything else around the neighborhood. This city has great bones. We have great buildings and things we need to be maintaining, as opposed to tearing them down for throwing up something that's going to look derivative of everyone else. That's how we lose our identity.
And I think this may answer a couple of the other questions that were submitted before and during. I think, since you kind of dropped the bomb, Evan, of like, hey, can we just, make an agreement to stop doing this? I would take that a step further and being like, hey, if developers come to council and they tell us, hey, we're on a timeline, we need you to vote on this like today or next week. Nope.
Sucks to be you.
In therapy, we always say, your crisis is not my crisis. So if you're on a time crunch, that does not mean the city of Cincinnati is on a time crunch for you. So if they don't come prepared with, here's how much we plan to profit off of this, or, here's our exact plan. It's 200 pages. We need you to vote on it in 2 days. Nope, sorry. Submit it a couple of months in advance. We'll read through it. We'll talk it over. But yeah, we need to put an end to companies like 3CDC who are known to do this. So that's to answer one of Allie's, or no, this was an anonymous question. Holding developers like 3CDC accountable for what they have done. I think one of the best ways to do that is to say, hey, on this new council, that's going to end. You're not going to be able to do those same things anymore.
Just the council rolling over, but not anymore.
Yeah, and so saying no to, buildings that don't look good, saying no to plans that are thrown at council urgently and expected to be voted on urgently.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's got to end.
I wanted to chat out Chaz in the comments about the zoning piece, and I think that he is spot on in that, like, banning single family zoning, again, as Key mentioned, which is, very much tied to racist practice of redlining and creating neighborhoods in which, Black and brown folks couldn't buy houses. But Stacey, to your point, and again, thinking about Cincinnati and the uniqueness of our city and how, like, I will forever say that, like, the work really has been put in. We just have to be folks that will champion it. There's a great organization, the Community Engagement Action Team, led by Sue Wilkie. So if you're Northside, you know Sue Wilkie. Sue Wilkie has been championing for the past 10 years a comprehensive community engagement plan that's not only embedded in council, but is embedded in every city department. And so what this does is that it doesn't leave community engagement to be this arbitrary thing, but is a thing that is actually measured and a part of the process. And so you don't ever come up to the situation where a developer has to then define for, their version of community engagement, but they have to meet benchmarks. And then the city also has to meet benchmarks for community engagement. And we know that community engagement slows down the process. And when you slow down the process, you have more eyes on the process. And when you have more eyes on the process that is slower, then that's how we begin to, be looking at budgets and understanding, and you're not able to just kind of like squeak a process by. So I guess I would say that, like, that work has been introduced, right? I know Jan Michelle Lemon-Kearney, Councilmember Lemon-Kearney, is probably going to reintroduce that. That was something that Councilmember Denard was advancing, but we're right, and the community folks are have been putting this on the ground. And so I just really see our job in scouring what we know people have put their blood, sweat, equity into, and sort of advancing that work.
I just wanted to hop on real quick and say it is 8:25. This is like the fastest hour and a half ever. Like, I want to talk about these things forever. I wanted to ask panelists and attendees as well, if you wanted to hang on for maybe 15 more minutes just to talk, close some things up. Attendees, is that respectful to your guys' time? Panelists, is that respectful to your time? And if anyone needs to bow out, no hard feelings.
I have a hard stop at 8:30 because I have to talk to my mama. I'm the only Black child, so.
Oh, me too.
So,
only child in the house. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Please do that. I don't want your mama coming after me for keeping you late. So, let's go ahead. I would say, honestly, let's go ahead and just kind of table things now, but let's try to have another one of these Gosh, I wanted to have one once a month, but now I'm thinking maybe trying to aim for like twice a month. And we can have different panelists because not everyone's going to be able to attend every time. So
I'm
for
also
those,
hoping to have some other panels myself going forward that I'd
sweet.
love to have you guys on talking about things. So yeah, let's definitely get more of this for sure.
Yeah, and one thing I learned too is that maybe in the future panel discussions could be about like specific topics. So like, hey, this is going to be a panel discussion on defunding the police. This is going to be about corruption. So that may be something that we consider moving forward. But does anyone want to give a quick, 30-second closing statement? Evan, you're unmuted, so I'm gonna call on you first.
Hi. Yeah, I just want to thank everyone for showing up. I very much appreciate it. Obviously, we have a lot of work to do ahead, but together, more hands make light work. But yeah, if you're interested in my platform, I have the website hopeforcincinnati.com, and I'm pretty much on all socials except for maybe like, I guess Snapchat. I don't know. I think I'm on everything though. So yeah, feel free to follow me, and look forward to what happens going forward.
Awesome. Thank you, Evan. Nick, were you going to say something?
Collaboration that we have going here, and I really like the teamwork that's going on. I think this is definitely a team effort, and figuring out these solutions, definitely we have to work as a team to figure out what we're going to do for the city residents to make these things happen and make.
Thank you for sharing. Phil, I know you didn't get to participate on all the questions tonight. You might be driving, so maybe this might not be the best time to, well, he might be frozen. I can't tell what's going on. Phil, if you can hear, jump right in. We're doing like quick little closing statements.
Hello?
We can hear you.
Okay, great. Yeah, appreciate you having me. Sorry I wasn't attentive like I should have been, but we had my girls' senior night. It was a success. They won. Parents were happy because that was the first time they saw the kids play, because we haven't been allowing fans all year. So I just wrapped up, and I'm on my way to the grocery store right now so I can get some stuff for my family. But hopefully you have me on next time and I can be more attentive and responsive more. But one thing I am excited about, everybody had great things to say. It seemed like everybody was kind of mostly on the same page with everything. So it was really good to hear everybody's responses and everybody's unity. Like Evan said, all hands together, make things a little bit lighter. I say with team together, everyone accomplishes more. So excited about this and look for more things to come. And hope to talk to you all soon.
Likewise. Reggie, since you have to go talk to mom, you're welcome to give your parting statement and then zip out if you need to.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I really enjoyed this conversation, and to fellow candidates, I think that this is critically important to the campaign and to the work. I think that voters need to see candidates engage. I think voters need to see candidates disagree, and then candidates reach consensus, because that's the job and that's the work. And so I absolutely welcome. And I also welcome the opportunity to be pushed, right? To learn and to flex. This idea that someone has to have like a 100% consistency in their ideology, right, doesn't allow for this idea of growth. So thank you. I think this was a really incredible conversation, and let's keep doing it.
Awesome. Key?
So I think I need to be real with you all. And I think that it is time that we acknowledge that half of our city are Black, African American. And it is time that we have someone who represents the folks who are Black, the folks who have lived in poverty, the folks whose neighborhood was basically torn up by putting I-75, the folks who are displaced due to a stadium, the folks who have disabilities like myself, right? And and I think it's important that we acknowledge that these marginalized experiences help us to become a stronger person. And I want to represent and support and yield space for those folks. If you vote for me, I am not here to vote on my own. I'm here to represent my constituency. And that is something that I think that we are moving further away from, but I want to bring us back closer to that. And so know that if you vote for me, I will act on your behalf, and I will make sure that we have accountability, that we will have transparency, that community is going to be there. And I think it's important that we have someone who's willing to vote no, willing to vote against the emergencies, and willing to let people have input. And so vote Quebec. That's my website. And thank you so much for providing this space. And hopefully this will not be the last time that we have this conversation. Also, wear a mask, socially distance, and have a great night.
Yes, all great comments. And likewise, I appreciate all of the attendees. I appreciate the panelists. This has been really awesome, really fun. And I want to host these so that voters can be informed on our platforms, our issues, how we plan on voting things, so that they can make informed decisions when they go to the polls in November. So that's what these are all about. Follow us on Twitter, read up on our websites, really educate yourselves so that you can vote for the candidates who really, really are going to drive home the things that are important to you. So panelists, you are free to go. For attendees that are still on, I'll stay on for a few minutes just to get some questions about like the flow of the event. So to kind of figure out how to make it better for next time. So otherwise, y'all are welcome to have, you're welcome to have a good night. Please have a good night. Stay safe and stay
Just
healthy.
lording over everybody, like, oh, you're relieved now.
I know, I feel so bad. I'm used to running therapy groups, so can't help it. But
Thank you so much, everybody.
take care. Have good nights, everyone.